खबरां दा लेखा जोखा विच आप सब दा स्वागत है।
Khabran Da Lekha Jokha, November 21st, 2024 has been sponsored by Hanif Litigation. For criminal or regulatory law matters, contact lawyer Shahid Hanif at 604-626-3144. Liberals plan to send $250 checks to Canadians, cutting GST on some items. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says his government plans to temporarily lift the federal sales tax off a slew of items just in time for Christmas and send checks to millions of Canadians this spring. Trudeau announced the proposal affordability measures in Toronto alongside Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on Thursday morning ahead of the government's fall economic statement. The government can set prices at the checkout, but we can put more money in people's pockets, Trudeau said. We know people are under pressure. This is there to help them. The GST break which would begin December 14 and end February 15, applies to a number of items. Prepared food, including vegetable trays, pre-made meals, salads and sandwiches. Restaurant meals, whether dine-in, take-out or delivery. Snacks including chips, candy and granola bars. Beer, wine, cider and pre-mixed alcoholic beverages below 7% ABV. Children's clothing and footwear, car seats and diapers. Children's toys such as board games, dolls and video game consoles. Books, print newspapers and puzzles for all ages. Christmas trees. Canadians who worked in 2023 and earned $150,000 or less would also receive a check of $250 in the spring. About 18.7 million people will receive the checks, costing the government about $4.7 billion, while the GST break is expected to cost another $1.6 billion. In order to get the measures passed through Parliament, the Liberals will need the support of an opposition party, and the NDP appears poised to do just that, taking credit for forcing the government to adopt its ideas. The measures come as an inflation-driven affordability crunch has left voters unhappy with the Liberal government.
प्रधानमंत्री जस्टिन ट्रूडो ने क्रिस्टिया फ्रीलैंड दे नाल अज टोरंटो विखे ऐलाननामे कीते ने कि 15 दिसंबर तो लेके 15 फरवरी तक फेडरल टैक्स जिहड़ा जीएसटी है ਉਹ ਕੁਝ ਵਸਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏਗਾ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੀਪੇਡ ਸੈਲਡਸ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਰੈਸਟੋਰੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਣੇ ਖਾਣ ਜਾਂ ਖਾਣੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਮੰਗਾਉਣ ਤੋਂ ਲੱਗ ਕੇ ਬੇਵਰੇਜ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ 7% ਤੋਂ ਘੱਟ ਅਲਕੋਹਲ ਦੀ ਮਾਤਰਾ ਹੋਏਗੀ, ਔਰ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਖਾਣ ਪੀਣ, ਪਹਿਨਣ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਲੱਤਾ ਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੀ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਰ ਸੀਟਸ, ਬੋਰਡ ਗੇਮਸ, डाइपर्स के गिनती मिनती के उत्ते सारे दे उत्ते जीएसटी जिहड़ा टैक्स आ वो नहीं होएगा। बोर्ड गेम ते क्रिसमस ट्री के उपर भी जीएसटी टैक्स नहीं लगेगा। याद रहे फेडरल सरकार नूं इस दे नाल तकरीबन 1.6 बिलियन डॉलर इस दे उत्ते खर्च होएगा, जदों कि आउण वाली रुत दे विच हर वो व्यक्ति परिवार जिन्हां ने $1.5 लाख तो घट जिन्हां दी इनकम आ उन्हां नूं $250 की रिबेट भी जाएगी, जिहड़ी कि फेडरल सरकार नूं 18.7 मिलियन कैनेडियन नूं भेजण दे विच तकरीबन $4.7 बिलियन का खर्चा जिहड़ा पएगा। हर इससे हर हालत विच पास होने की सूरत हाल है, क्योंकि एनडीपी का कहना कि उन्हां दा ख्याल है जिहड़ा उस नूं मौजूदा सरकार अपना रही है।
Dissolution of Vancouver Park Board would save $70 million over 10 years, says Mayor. It was touted as an update on the City of Vancouver's transition away from an independent elected park board, but Mayor Ken Sim didn't offer much new information. Sim explained the transition working group has come up with 2 recommendations for how cities should take over the elected park board's responsibilities. We are committed to getting this right, and that's why I'm excited about the recommendations from the working group, including the creation of a dedicated council committee, a subcommittee for parks and recreation, and a community partner relations office, Sim explained during a news conference today. Sim explained that streamlining the parks and recreation processes will save city taxpayers money totaling $70 million over 10 years. Make no mistake about it, this transition isn't just about governors. It's about unlocking opportunities to save, to improve, and to invest by streamlining services, cutting duplication, and eliminating unnecessary red tape, he stated. We are going to save Vancouverites $70 million over the next decade. That is $7 million a year, or that's the equivalent of almost 1% property tax decrease. The inverse of a property tax increase in the city of Vancouver, and these are conservative estimates, he continued. Sim said that as the transition team works together with council, the city expects further savings. All savings, Sim stated, will be reinvested into city parks and recreation. In December of 2023, City Council passed a motion asking the provincial government to dissolve the Park Board. The Park Board has most recently been challenging the move, voting to remain an elected body and preserve its own existence in September. On Thursday, Sim shared that the city has already identified 89 acres of land. That's right, 89 acres of land that could be designated as permanent park space after the transition. When asked why these lands couldn't be protected under the current model, Deputy City Manager Sandra Singh explained that the parcels are currently under care, custody and management, and due to critical infrastructure under those parks that the city requires access to, they wouldn't go ahead and designate them. When preparing the recommendations, the transition team looked to other jurisdictions across the country to assess their governance model, Singh explained. A quality of service review was not part of this completion. What we really were looking at was the governance structure and the operating structure of the current dual governance system, she shared. Typically, when we develop strategies, we develop plans, we do comparative analysis. So when the time comes to renew some of the existing strategies around parks, that would be undertaken at that time. Sim had previously shared that the elected 135-year-old park board has done amazing work and added the transition has nothing to do with the people or the love and care that they, the elected park board, show. We are talking about a broken city. The move will bring parks and recreation under the direct oversight of the City Council. This aligns the management structure for our parks and recreation with how it's done in literally every single city in Canada, and with the exception of Minneapolis, every single city in North America, Sim said in January.
ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ ਸਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਮੇਅਰ ਸਿਮਸ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਖੁਲਾਸਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦਾ ਪਾਰਕਸ ਐਂਡ ਬੋਰਡ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੋਰਡ ਆ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਜ਼ੋਲਵ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਨੂੰ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਅਗਣ ਵਾਲੇ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ $70 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋਏਗਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ $7 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਔਸਤਨ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਖੁਲਾਸਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹੀ ਮਾਡਲ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਦਸੰਬਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਮੋਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਸਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਔਰ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਮੱਦੇਨਜ਼ਰ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਕਾਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਸਿਟੀ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਾਰਕਸ ਐਂਡ ਬੋਰਡ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਰਿਕ੍ਰੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਐਂਡ ਪਾਰਕਸ ਦੀ ਸਾਂਭੋ ਸੰਭਾਲ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਹੋਏਗੀ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ $70 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਵੀ ਹੋਗਾ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਐਕਨੋਲੇਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 135 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪਾਰਕ ਐਂਡ ਰਿਕ੍ਰੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਬੋਰਡ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਬਿਹਤਰੀਨ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਪਾਰਕਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਤੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਸਵਾਲੀਆ ਚਿੰਨ੍ਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਤੋਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਪਾਰਕਸ ਐਂਡ ਬੋਰਡ ਰਿਕ੍ਰੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਦੀ ਸੰਭਾਲ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ ਦੇ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਰਹੇਗੀ।
Gaetz withdraws as Trump's pick for Attorney General. Matt Gaetz withdrew Thursday as President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General following continued scrutiny over federal sex trafficking investigation that cast doubt on his ability to be confirmed as the nation's chief federal law enforcement officer. The Florida Republicans' announcement came one day after meeting with senators in an effort to win their support for his confirmation to lead the Justice Department. While the momentum was strong, it is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition, Gaetz said in a statement announcing his decision. There is no time to waste on a needlessly portrayed Washington's scuffle. Thus, I'll be withdrawing my name from consideration to serve as Attorney General. Trump's DOJ must be in place and ready on day one. Trump, in a social media post, said, I greatly appreciate the recent efforts of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. He was doing very well, but at the same time did not want to be distraction for the administration, for which he has much respect. Matt has a wonderful future and I look forward to watching all the great things he will do. Gaetz's withdrawal is a blow to Trump's push to install steadfast loyalists in his incoming administration and the first sign that Trump could face resistance from members of his own party to pick with eyebrow-raising backgrounds. Gaetz's announcement came days after an Attorney General for two women said that his client Old House Ethics Committee investigation that Gaetz paid them for sex on multiple occasions beginning in 2017. When Gaetz was a Florida congressman, he resigned from the House that Trump announced he would nominate him for the cabinet. One of the women testified she saw Gaetz having sex with a 17-year-old at a party in Florida in 2017. According to the attorney Joel Lepard has said his client testified she didn't think Gaetz knew the girl was underage, stopped the relationship when he found out, and did not resume it until after she turned 18. The age of consent in Florida is 18. Gaetz has vehemently denied any wrongdoing and said last year that the Justice Department's investigation into sex trafficking allegations involving underage girls had ended with no federal charges against him.
ਗਵਾਂਢੀ ਮੁਲਕ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਡੋਨਲਡ ਟਰੰਪ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਐਡਮਿਨਿਸਟ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਰਚਿਤ ਨੇ ਅਟਾਰਨੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਗਟਸ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾਮ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਥਡਰਾ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਈ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਦੇ ਆਧਾਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਜ਼ਰਸਾਨੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸੈਕਸ ਟ੍ਰੈਫਿਕਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੌਜੂਦਾ ਟਰੰਪ ਐਡਮਿਨਿਸਟ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਡਿਲੇ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਉਂਗਲੀ ਉਠਾਈ ਜਾਵੇ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਨਾਂ ਜੋ ਵਾਪਸ ਲੈ ਰਿਹਾ ਔਰ ਰਾਸ਼ਟਰਪਤੀ ਇਲੈਕਟ ਡੋਨਲਡ ਟਰੰਪ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਕਾਰਜ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਚਾਹਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਗਮ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਕਿਤਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਬਿਹਤਰੀਨ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ
BC RCMP to detail body-worn camera roll-out. Thousands of RCMP officers in BC are about to get body-worn cameras. Mounties have scheduled a news conference for 11 a.m. in Surrey to discuss the rollout, which is expected to start with around 3,000 cameras. Over the next year and a half, that is expected to grow to 10,000. The expectation is for officers to be recording when answering calls or interacting with the public. The RCMP's corporate management officer, Tonia Gogowan, says they are training officers to develop the muscle memory of seatbelt off, camera on. The Prime Minister proposed the initiative when $238.5 million over 6 years and $50 million in ongoing funding for the cameras.
BC ਦੀ RCMP ਦੇ ਅਫਸਰ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਜੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੋਡੀ ਕੈਮਰਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਹਿਨਿਆ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਮੁੱਢਲੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ 3000 ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਅਫਸਰ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਬੋਡੀ ਕੈਮਰਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਔਨ ਰੱਖਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰੀ ਹੈ ਇੰਟਰੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਹੋ ਸਕੇ ਔਰ ਅਗਾਊਂ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਛੇਤੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੈਮਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ 10000 ਤੱਕ ਹੋਏਗੀ ਔਰ ਜਦ ਰਹੇ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ $235 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਜੀ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਮੀ ਭਰੀ ਸੀ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਅਫਸਰ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ RCMP ਦੇ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਰੀਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੋਡੀ ਕੈਮਰਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਪਹਿਨਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਔਨ ਡਿਊਟੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੰਟਰੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੋਡੀ ਕੈਮਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕੇ ਔਰ ਲੋੜ ਪੈ
Border agency detained dozens of forced labor cargo shipments. Now it's being sued. Canada's border agency says it has detained about 50 shipments of cargo over suspicions they were products of forced labor under rules introduced in 2020. But only one was eventually determined to be in breach of the ban. The Canada Border Service Agency provided the figures after being asked about a lawsuit against it by a Victoria solar firm which says a shipment of solar panels worth more than $5 million was wrongfully detained over false suspicions they were made with forced labor in China. Charge Solar Renewables Incorporation says in a federal court lawsuit that the months it took to convince the agency to release the panels irreparably damaged its market position. The CBSA declined an interview request but said in an email statement that the import prohibition respecting forced labor came into force in July of 2020 and border agents classify goods on a case-by-case basis. It said that since 2021, approximately 50 shipments have been anticipated and assessed. After an extensive review of detailed supply chain information provided by importers, one shipment was intercepted and determined to be produced by means of forced labor and prohibited entry into the Canadian marketplace. The remaining shipments were permitted entry, it said. One other shipment was abandoned at the Canadian border by the importer. It said it was prohibited from naming any of the companies involved in the detentions, and it would not comment on the specifics of Charge Solar's lawsuit filed this month in Vancouver. The lawsuit says Charge Solar had supply contract with Chinese firm Longi Green Energy Technology, and the panels were shipped to Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary between February and April of 2024. It says 47 containers were detained by border agents who told the firm it needed to show the panels worth more than $3.8 million weren't prohibited as goods made with prison or forced labor. The company says it provided thousands of pages of information to the agency about the manufacture of the panels, including affidavits from those along the supply chain attesting they weren't made with forced labor. The company, which did not respond to a request for comment, says in a lawsuit that it strongly opposed the detention of the goods. The lawsuit says the holdup resulted in customers cancelling orders while the agency took an unprecedented step requiring Charge Solar to explain solar module supply chains. It says similar or identical goods, some from the same supplier, that were imported by competitors weren't subject to investigations or detentions, and as a result, Charge Solar's dominant market share was significantly and irreparably eroded. The Charge Solar shipments were eventually released in June and July. Charge Solar says that deal with Longi involved products originating in Vietnam. However, forced labor researchers say Longi has a very high risk of exposure to forced labor in its products due to sourcing from China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Researchers at the Helena Kennedy Center for International Justice at Sheffield Hallam University in Britain said Longi was the largest global supplier of solar wafers to companies that produce solar cells. The researchers concluded the firm sourcing from Xinjiang in China's west meant that its risk of exposure to forced labor in their products was transferred to all users of its solar panels. In March 2023, Global Affairs Canada issued an advisory to Canadian firms doing business in Xinjiang to bring attention to human rights violations in China affecting other ethnic minorities from Xinjiang. A Muslim ethnic minority who have been the subject of serious human rights violation by China, according to a 2022 report by the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. Global Affairs issued the advisory to help Canadian firms and stakeholders understand the legal and reputational risk posed to companies whose supply chains engage with entities possibly implicated in forced labor. William Pellerin, an international trade lawyer in Ottawa, said Canadian enforcement action against goods suspected of involving forced labor has paled in comparison with efforts in the United States. The U.S. Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act made it easier to take action on goods from Xinjiang believed to be made with forced labor, he said. Much of the world's polysilicon used in the production of solar panels comes from Xinjiang. The region really is very important to global supply chains across multiple sectors, he said. He said that the United States has detained billions of worth of goods believed to be involved forced labor, including very large volumes of Chinese solar products. I think it behooves any party that is bringing in solar material from China to be extremely diligent in its supply chain and to ask all of the questions to make sure it has full understanding, going as far back as possible upstream into the input materials to make sure that your supply chain is as clean as possible, he said. Berlin said he couldn't comment on the specifics of Charged Solar's case, but any action against the government faces a very high bar. He said border guards and law enforcers had a vast amount of discretion carrying out their duties. Longi did not respond to any email request for comment on the detention. This report was published by Canadian press.
ਇੱਕ ਖਬਰ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਬੋਰਡਰ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ ਕਾਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰੀ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਸੋਲਰ ਚੈਨਲਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੰਪੋਰਟ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਆਧਾਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੋਰਡਰ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਸ਼ਿਪਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਸ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਆਈ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਬਰੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਫੋਰਸ ਲੇਬਰ ਭਾਵ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਦੇ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਧਾਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਡੀ ਮਾਤਰਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 4 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਦੇ ਕਰੀਬ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਮਾਨ ਸੀ ਕੰਟੇਨਰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਔਰ ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੋਕਣ ਤੋਂ ਉਪਰੰਤ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਜੂਨ ਜੁਲਾਈ ਤੱਕ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਕੰਪਨੀ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਡੇ ਪੱਧਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਘਾਟਾ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਛਡਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵਕਤ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਮਾਲ ਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹੈ ਉੱਥੇ ਨਾਲ ਦੀ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਪਨੀ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰੈਪੂਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਦਾਅ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਲੱਗੀ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਬੋਰਡਰ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਹਿਸ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਨੂੰਨੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਯਾਦ ਰਹੇ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਗਲੋਬਲ ਅਫੇਅਰ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਹਿੱਤੇ ਨੇ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਦੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਫੋਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੇਬਰ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਚੇਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਸੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਹਿੱਤਾ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਸੋਲਰ એનર્ਜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਬੰਧਿਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾਤਰ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਬਣਾਈਆਂ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ
BC Conservatives leader named Shadow Cabinet gives job to controversial member. BC Conservatives leader John Rustard has assigned jobs to 41 of his 44-member caucus, including giving a critic's position to MLA Brant Chapman, who faced calls to step down during the campaign over controversial social media remarks. Several groups called on Rustard during last month's election to remove Chapman as his party's candidate over the post, including one in which he called Palestinian children inbred, working, talking, breathing time bombs. Rustard said during the campaign that it would be up to voters to judge his party's candidates, and Chapman, who apologized for the remarks, was elected in the riding of South Surrey. Chapman has been named critic for Transit and the Insurance Corporation of BC. Other members of Rustard's shadow cabinet include former members of the opposition BC United, which suspended its campaign in an effort not to split the right of centre vote. Eleanor Stocko is the critic for public safety and Solicitor General. Teresa Watt takes on tourism, anti-racism and trade. Peter Millibor will shadow the finance ministry, and Ian Patton is the critic for agriculture and fisheries. Rustard says in a statement that with the talent and dedication of his caucus, they will hold Premier David Eby to account for the government's out-of-control spending and ongoing failures in healthcare, public safety and addictions. Rustard says Eby's new cabinet appears to be a taxpayer-funded loyalty program that rewards the NDP caucus. Eby introduced his new cabinet this week, which includes 23 ministers, 4 ministers of state and 14 parliamentary secretaries. He also announced postings for caucus chair, deputy caucus chair, government whip, deputy government whip, and nominees for deputy speaker and committee of the whole deputy chair. Rustard says in a statement that Eby appointed 42 or 47 MLAs to a cabinet or parliamentary secretary positions appears to be a loyalty program for a premier desperate to cling to power. Members of the legislature earn an annual basic salary of more than $119,500, with cabinet ministers getting an extra $59,766, which is the same salary boost Rustad received as opposition leader. Forest Minister Ravi Parman says in a statement that while Rustad is making claims about an expanded cabinet and promising to force an election, EB and his team gets to work on the priorities of British Columbians, like creating good-paying jobs, strengthening healthcare, and delivering $1,000 middle-class tax cut. EB's New Democrats were elected last month with 47 members, a one-seat majority in BC's 93rd seat legislature.
BC ਦੀ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਰੋਧੀ ਧਿਰ ਕੰਜ਼ਰਵੇਟਿਵ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਸ਼ੈਡੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੈਬਨਿਟ ਆ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਐਲਾਨ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਰਚਾ ਤੇ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਦੇਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਚੈਪਮਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ BC ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਬਕਾ MLA ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਚੁਣਿਆ ਗਿਆ। ਔਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਜ਼ ਏ ਕ੍ਰਿਟਿਕ ਤੇ ਸ਼ੈਡੋ ਭਾਵ पूरी तरह उन्होंने तफ्तीश करनी और निगाह रखने वाली सेवावां देने की जिम्मेवारी जिथे दी गई उत्थे नाल दी नाल जॉन रस्टड ने यह भी कहा कि इस तरह लगता है कि डेविड एबी की जिहड़ी कैबिनेट है एक तरीके नाल लॉयल्टी प्रोग्राम वर्गी है और उन्होंने कारगुजारियां ते वो पूरी तरह निगाह रखणगे।
Surrey RCMP seized hundreds of kilograms of illicit drugs. Mounties in Surrey say that 3 suspects have been arrested as part of what they claim is one of the biggest illicit drug seizures in the detachment's history. Surrey RCMP Sergeant Glenn Leeson says the investigation lasted over a year, resulting in the search of 7 properties throughout Metro Vancouver. Mounties took multiple suspects into custody. Leeson says only 3 were arrested. He says charges are being forwarded to Crown Counsel, but that's going to take time. Crown's going to have to go through the evidence and ultimately they have the decision here on who gets charged and who doesn't get charged, Leeson explained. Police seized a lengthy list of drugs including over 36 kilograms of fentanyl, 23 kilograms of MDMA, 20 kilograms of cocaine, 23 kilograms of meth, and quantities of other drugs, as well as $119,000 in cash and 3 vehicles. Mounties say the suspects were also involved in trafficking illegal firearms, including 3D printed ghost guns and weapons purchased in the United States. Leeson added the seizure presented Wednesday isn't related to any of illicit drug bust in Surrey in recent months. Assistant Commissioner Brian Edwards insisted that drug busts are an incomplete method of stopping illicit drug supply and toxic drug harm risk. Enforcement of drug is only one pillar and a strategy of a community to prevent that illicit drugs destroy lives, and we should not equivocate about that. The message should be clear: don't go down this road, and we want to do everything that we can at the front end to stop that, Edwards said, addressing children and parents.
Surrey RCMP ने कल खुलासा किया कि उन्होंने नशे की एक वड्डी जिहड़ी खेप है उस दा पर्दाफाश किया, जिस दे विच तकरीबन सैकड़े किलोग्राम जिहड़ा नशा है कोकेन मैथ ते वर्गे नशीले जिहड़े पदार्थ ने उन्हां नूं पकड़िया ते उस दे नाल तकरीबन $1,19,000 कैश बरामद किया गया। नकली ते असला बनाउण वालियां मशीनां जां असला जिहड़ा वो भी उन्होंने इस छापेमारी दे विच पकड़िया, जिस दे विच कि मैट्रो वैनकूवर दे विच कई थावां दे उत्ते पिछले 1 साल तो चल रही तफ्तीश के अधीन उन्होंने सारी वड्डी नशे की जिहड़ी खेप है उस नूं पकड़िया ते 3 लोगों को गिरफ्तार भी किया। और उन्हों का यह कहना कि असीं क्राउन नूं जिहड़ा केस चार्जेस ने जिहड़े वो भी रिकमेंड वो कर रहे हैं। और इसका खुलासा जिहड़ा करते हुए नाल दी नाल पुलिस के उच्च अधिकारी ने इस गल का भी खुलासा किया कि वो लोग जिहड़े कि नशे के किसी भी तरह के व्यापार के नाल संबंधित ने वो जान लैण कि उन्हां वो साडी पकड़ तो जिहड़ा बाहर नहीं हैं, असीं उन्हां नूं जरूर पकड़ांगे। और ये सब तो ज़्यादा वड्डी हुण तक दी खेप है, जिसका कि दूसरियां खेप दे नशे दियां खेपां दे नाल कोई गिनती मिलती नहीं है।
इसी के साथ हमें दीजिएगा इजाजत। खबरां दा लेखा जोखा प्रोग्राम से until next time, goodbye and be safe.